Davy. I'm awesome. Welcome to Davy's Awesome Stories, where I tell funny stories from my past or go on a rant in an effort to make you laugh. So a while ago, I did a video entitled, What's in a Name? Where I basically talked about how important the name of something can be to its success. For example, in that, VHS just sounded better than Betamax. Hydrox, not as good a name as Oreo. Mentioned how I don't think it would have been quite the competitor to McDonald's if it was still named Instaburger King. But as time has gone on, I've found other famous things that had rivals of it, if you will. But why did this become more famous? And the only thing I can think of, the name. The first one I'll get to. Back in the day, when toasters were a new technology, but all they could do was toast bread. But there was booming success with things like canned soups. For lunch, you could just open a can, put it on the stove, heat up for about 5 minutes, and you got soup. Another thing that was booming was TV dinners. You could just take the foil off, put them in the oven for a little bit, dinner. And some companies were trying to say, hey, can we make something other than toasted bread that we could do in a toaster and make money? And one company came up with that. Post-consumer brands had a man in their test kitchens working tirelessly. Finally came up with something. A tiny little pastry. You could put it in the toaster and just set it like you would bread. And when it pops out of the toaster, you're going to have a nice little toasted pastry tart. Or as he named it, Country Squares. Thought I was going to say Pop-Tarts? The original Pop-Tart, the iconic one we all know of, was originally named Country Squares by a different company. Now, obviously, the first big mistake they made was they advertised Country Squares coming several months before it was actually going to be available on shelves. So over to Kellogg's, they see these advertisements. They're like, we got to beat them to the punch. So they did. They figured out how are they doing this, and they came up with something that they were like, it's a tart. It pops up out of the toaster. Fun little name, Pop-Tarts. And people say that that's the reason that Country Squares lost to Pop-Tarts. I disagree. Because Kellogg's made their own mistake. They put Pop-Tarts out, did not expect it to be the hit that it was, so they ran out of products in stores for a couple of months. They were on back orders because people went so crazy for them. Because look, a tiny little convenient breakfast. We're coming to a day and age where we just don't have time to sit down and make breakfast for our kids every day. You can just give them a Pop-Tart. So while that was going on, Country Squares swooped in. They started getting the market. But as soon as Pop-Tarts came back, Country Squares started losing again. Why? I can only imagine because Pop-Tarts just sounds better than Country Squares. And because of this, when people think of a toasted pastry, they think Pop-Tarts. Not only does it roll off the tongue more, it's fun now. Pop-Tarts. And Country Squares didn't even go away. They just eventually got renamed Toast'ems. You thought that was just an off-brand? That was the original. But another original that eventually got overshadowed. Gelatin has been around for a long time. Now, I'm not a big fan of Jell-O. I don't hate it, but I can honestly say in 15 years of marriage, neither me or my wife have ever looked at one another and said, you know what I'm craving? Jell-O. It hasn't happened. It's just that kind of thing of like, if I'm at your, little dinner get-together thing and that happens to be what you're serving for dessert, I'll eat it. But in my head, I'm going to be sitting there thinking like, oh, Jell-O, really? Yeah. Way to step it up there. Oh, there's pineapple chunks in it. Man, you went all out. But out loud, I'm just going to be polite. The only time I can ever think that I've actually really enjoyed Jell-O was when I was in the hospital. Mainly because I ate the food they gave me, then ate the Jell-O and was like, oh, thank God. Eating that chicken, I thought I'd lost my sense of taste. The Jell-O was the only thing that had any flavor. But Jell-O is definitely something all of us know about. We've all had it. Some people really love it. Like my mother used to love it. She used to get all excited about it. Like, guess what I made for dessert? Jell-O. As if either my brother and I were going to get all excited like, oh, Jell-O, you spoil us. No, we both would usually have the same reaction, which was, okay. But Jell-O ran over. The first one to package itself as a little tiny mix of gelatin you could make at home easily. You didn't have to go get the horse snail yourself. Here you go, little box. Gonna make a whole thing of gelatin. And what will be the brand of this gelatin? We will call it Bromangulon. That was a horrible, horrible name. Bromangulon? That doesn't even sound like a dessert to me. That sounds like a surfer came up with their version of hobo stew. Like, dude, I just mixed in all kinds of things, man. I call it Bromangulon. And I look at him and say, why didn't you drown? But still, Bromangulon. You can imagine when Jell-O came out and gave their own gelatin with a name that actually sounded like something that would be a gelatin. It picked up a lot quicker and got a lot more famous. To the point that Bromangulon is a thing of the past. But apparently, it tasted exactly the same. I've had different brands of gelatin before, and you could blindfold taste test me, and I would never be able to tell you which one is which. You could switch the boxes and lie to me, and I would think that you just got the name brand. I wouldn't know. But, if it did come down to it, I've got to buy the Bromangulon or the Jell-O. Even if the Jell-O is a little bit more expensive, I ain't buying that crap. Last one I'm going to talk about today, though, it's not a product or of any kind. Just history. The most famous family feud that ever existed. Feud that lasted almost 30 years. From 1865 to 1891. The Hatfields and the McCoys. Taking place on the East Coast. A feud that resulted in the deaths of 12 to 20 different people. And has become synonymous in our culture. There's been books upon books written about the Hatfields and the McCoys. Documentaries. Movies. Even a miniseries that came out a little more than 10 years ago. And it's even something that we hear said all the time. I heard it said many times before I even knew who they were. Because we moved around a lot. And for some reason, wherever you move, there's always a sect of people over here that don't like you over here simply because you live over here. Whether it's a trailer park, you'd hear your parents say, just stay away from over there. It's like the Hatfields and the McCoys. Or an apartment complex. One of your friends that you made there would tell you, over there, it's like the Hatfields and the McCoys. I remember the one where I heard it and finally had to go, what is that? I was in my late teens, about 17 years old. And I was living in a small town called Fernley, Nevada. Never heard of it, not surprised. And before that, we lived in Carson City, the capital of the state. But before that, we lived in another small town that was near Fernley called Silver Springs, Nevada. Never heard of it, not surprised. And I remember in Fernley finding out that people in Fernley hate people in Silver Springs. Two little towns right next to each other. And I remember going, why? They're dirty white trash in that town. Are you not paying attention to where you live? Like what, this is clean white trash area? I don't know, dude. It's weird. But there is a rivalry. It's the Hatfields and the McCoys. That was the moment that finally sparked to me, what the heck are they talking about? I need to know. So to finally get an answer to the question of what I'd been hearing all my life, the Hatfields and the McCoys, the Hatfields and the McCoys, the Hatfields and the McCoys, I decided to go and use our version of Google back then. This was like late 90s, early 2000s, where Google was called the library. You had to go to the library. You had to find a book, and you had to read it. And I did. I read about the Hatfields and the McCoys. And thought it was a little weird that they're comparing just people over here who don't like people over here to people who were literally killing each other over any little excuse they could get. But I remember reading in that book that this wasn't even the worst family feud in American history. Not just history, American. But it's the most famous over all the world. Apparently in other countries, they've heard of the Hatfields and the McCoys. And it listed several family feuds. Some lasted longer. Almost all of them had higher death tolls. One I'd honestly forgot about up until recently. When I heard it and I was like, I remember reading a little bit about that. And by a little bit, I mean, there was a paragraph in this book. So I decided to look it up. It was the Pleasant Valley War between the Grahams and the Tewksbury. A war that lasted 10 years, from 1882 to 1892. So this was going on around the same time as the Hatfields and the McCoys. Whereas it may have only been 10 years versus almost 30, Hatfields and the McCoys had a death toll of 12 to 20. Like, they can confirm 12, but they think it was around 20. Versus the Grahams and the Tewksburys, that, in 10 years, caused the deaths of at least 35, maybe up to 50 people. The Hatfields and the McCoys, by the time it was over, there were still Hatfields and still McCoys. In fact, the two leaders were still alive. The Grahams and the Tewksburys, it didn't end until the Grahams were wiped out. The men, at least. The Hatfields and the McCoys, yeah, it caused civil disputes between West Virginia and Kentucky. The Grahams and the Tewksburys happened in Arizona, when it wasn't even a state. It was called Arizona Territory. And because of this feud, this bloody feud, when it came time for the government to decide whether or not to make Arizona an official state, they said no. Because of that feud, they decided Arizona was not ready to become a state. And it would not become a state until 1912, 20 years after this one ended. That's what this one caused. But if you don't live in Arizona, you probably have never heard of it. It's more commonly referred to as the Pleasant Valley War, but still, I found a couple of books about it, found a documentary about it, no actual movies. And again, living here, I live in Nevada, which borders Arizona. This happened around the same time and closer to us. Most of us don't know about it. In fact, I've brought it up to people from Arizona because we get a lot of them around here. And they're like, I've heard of it, but I know more about it than they do, and that's their state's history. Why was it the Hatfields and the McCoys got so much more media attention? Why were the Hatfields and the McCoys so much more famous than all these other feuds, all these other bloody feuds that were way worse than the Hatfields and the McCoys? Probably because it doesn't sound as good to say. It's like the Barbers and the Measles. Or it's like the Tullivers and the Martins. Or it's like the Grahams and the Tewksburys. No, none of that rolls off the tongue quite like it's like the Hatfields and the McCoys. I'm just saying, no matter how sweet it smells, if they changed the name of roses to thorny vaginas, you wouldn't be giving your wife a bouquet of them. So there you have it. That's my story video this week. Hope you guys enjoyed it. And if you did, make sure to hit like, hit subscribe, hit that little bell so you get notifications when I post videos. And leave a comment I can respond to in my next comment corner. Tell me some other things that you think became more famous simply because they had a better name. Love you guys.